Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. It's Tim and Julie Harris, and this is Friday. Now, here's our disclaimer. On our Friday podcast, we're not talking about our normal real estate coaching and training stuff. You can listen to the thousands of past podcasts where we talk about that as our daily fare. But on Fridays, we give ourselves a little break. We do not have outlines. And as you guys know, Julie's normally creating these long multi-page outlines with subpoints and points and the rest of it. But on Friday, we talk about whatever is on our mind that's not necessarily real estate related. And Julie and I have a lot on our mind. You guys have liked our Friday podcasts because I think sometimes the stuff that we bring up on our Friday shows is a little bit off the beaten path far enough that you're enjoying the journey along with us. So I don't think this Friday is going to disappoint you if you've enjoyed the past shows. And remember, if you want to listen to the past podcasts, if you're more wanting to tune into the specific tactical, practical stuff that we normally give you on our show and our books and our coaching programs, listen to our past podcasts. There's 7,000 of them. And we've been doing these podcasts forever. And if, remember, you've got to subscribe to our daily newsletter, which is harrisrealestatedaily.com. And that is where you're going to get all the long form transcripts to all of our past podcasts, in addition to a lot of content we make specifically for all of you, for those of you who are subscribing, I should say, to the newsletter. So Julie, let me start out by talking about something I've really been paying attention to.
Sure.
All right. We've been talking a lot about the effects of tariffs on real estate. We've been talking about, essentially you and I think about a month ago, did a podcast on how we were trying to kind of piece together why Trump was so wanting to do tariffs. And this was before he officially announced that he wanted to get rid of the federal income tax. And you and I were guessing that's the direction he was going to go, and we were right. I did pick up some little breadcrumbs in the ether from, different sources to solidify that theory that I had. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. So tariffs are people think that tariffs are going to be temporary. They're not going to be temporary. Tariffs are going to be in place forever. And it's interesting to watch these different industries react to the tariffs, because at the end of the day, what's going to happen, and Trump already said this, is that folks with incomes of less than $150,000 are going to not have to pay income taxes anymore because of the tariffs. And then they're going to start ratcheting essentially the income brackets up to people that will no longer have to pay taxes. Now, how does this go big picture? Big picture, it's going to reinforce domestic production of everything. In other words, there's going to be a lot of onshoring. Foreign companies basically are going to start making their stuff here to avoid tariffs. That is going to increase, obviously, the GDP of the United States. It's going to increase a lot of jobs, demand, all the good things that happen when there's a flurry of activity in new construction. Oh, we're thinking real estate again, but really the production of everything is going to move to be onshore. The other thing is really fascinating, and I hadn't really considered this, was the ramifications to the overall GDP that exists in the distant, like as a distant cousin to some of these new boom towns and some of these new boom industries. Because we're going to see, because of folks that are not, for example, folks that are not going to be paying income taxes anymore. Like Julie and I figured that the net taxes that someone making $75,000 a year pays per year is something like 16 grand. And the fact that they're not going to have to pay that $16,000 anymore, it means they're going to be spending it other places. You guys see how it's going to be benefiting the economy over and over again. And also for those of you guys who are, we're not being political. We've researched this, trying to understand what the whole end game was with tariffs. So the end game was to make the United States even more of an attractive place to live. The end game was to make the United States even more of an attractive place to start a business, or to expand your business to make production here. So overall, the short term, it's going to be very uncomfortable. And there's no doubt about it, because until U.S. Domestic production increases, you're not going to see, for example, I'll tell you something that happened in the automotive world. Some of you guys know that I started as a kind of a hobby, another podcast, and it's working out really well, called Full Throttle Talk. And if you're a car nerd, definitely listen to Full Throttle Talk. So we've gotten thousands of people that are listening to that podcast inside of 30 days. It's really ridiculous, frankly, how many car nerds there are in the world, way more than I thought. So yeah, Full Throttle Talk. It's something that I'm doing with two other guys. Julie didn't want to do the podcast on cars. Surprise, surprise. But one of the topics is what's going to happen to the prices of imported cars and what's going to happen to the prices of used late model imported cars. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Well, clarify that a little bit.
I
So what you're
will.
talking about is tariffs on brand
Anything that,
new, right?
right.
Versus no tariffs for resale.
Right, exactly. So brand new cars that are being brought into the United States that are not made in the United States are going to have a 25% tariff put on them. And it was fascinating to watch to see how some of the manufacturers were going to absorb either internally from their own margins or try to pass that along to consumers. And so here's what's absolutely going to happen in the short run. I'll use Ferrari as an example because we're going to talk about it on the Full Throttle Talk. So Ferrari has to pay a 25% tariff, or the consumers, it's going to be passed to consumers of Ferraris. So what Ferrari has already decided that they're going to do, and they have to pay the 25% on every single Ferrari. Ferrari is going to absorb the 15% of the 25%. So people buying certain model Ferraris are going to have to pay. You guys are saying, who cares about Ferraris? Because everyone else is going to do it the exact same way. Trust me. Honda's going to do it this way. Kia is going to do it this way. Until they're making their cars here, this is exactly what's going to happen. So the manufacturers are going to pass some of that tariff cost onto retail buyers, and the rest of it they're going to absorb. And every single imported car is 25% tariff. But then what's eventually going to happen, and faster than you think, all 25% is going to essentially be reflected in the cost of a new car. So if you wanted to go and buy your new Hyundai, let's say right now, maybe the Hyundai is made in Korea, and the car costs $50,000. Well, now the car is going to cost $50,000 plus another 25%. So that's what increases the cost of the car to over 60 grand because of the tariff. If all the tariff was passed to the customer, that means the customer would have to pay an additional 25%. But what Hyundai is going to do, what all these guys are going to do, is they're going to start taking from their own profit margins half of the tariff, probably something like that. Now, why are they doing that? Because they are not confident so think of all the things that this is really puts into flux. For example, Julie mentioned late model used cars. So late model used cars, let's say, for example, you're in the market to buy one of these used $50,000 Hyundais, let's say, or you want to buy a new one. But you can buy a slightly used one for $10,000 less, and you're a smart customer. But you said, $10,000, maybe I want to order my Hyundai the way I want it. I want all the options that I want at 10,000. Maybe I'll just buy the new one and who cares? But if all of a sudden the new one is $20,000 more than the slightly used one, then you're going to say, I'm buying that slightly used one. I don't care if I have to buy another gray car, doesn't matter. I'm buying a used one.
The money's more important than the color.
Exactly. Or whatever, right?
Or whatever. Yeah.
And so what's going to happen is used car prices, and this is something that we're already seeing this, but it's happening in other, because remember, cars are being tariffed 25%, but other imported items are also going to be tariffed as well. You're starting to see the essentially imported items in general, not depreciating, in some cases appreciating like, for example, on the used cars. What's going to happen is the used car price, there doesn't need to be a $20,000 delta between a new Hyundai, making that example up, and a used Hyundai. So $40,000 on the slightly used one, $60,000 for the new one because it's all tariffed up. What Hyundai dealers are going to do is they're going to raise the prices on the used one. So that means that in our opinion, the values of used cars, late model used cars, are going to increase, and you're going to see some inflation as in used car prices. And I think you're going to see inflation in a lot of other things that are going to be tariffed. Not everything's universally tariffed 25%. And this was really fascinating. And Julie and I spent a lot of time exploring this. Like, where are they coming up with these arbitrary numbers of 25% or 15% for this or 5% for that? All they're doing is matching, and Julie found out this, she researched this, they're matching tariff for tariff. So if you're importing your wine made in California into Italy, let's say, Italy, to protect their domestic wine producers, they're raising the prices of the California wine to make it more expensive, thus less appealing to their domestic, consumers. Well, what Trump has done is and the Italian wine was then imported into the United States, and there was a taxes and tariffs on it, but not like there is now. So if there's a 20% tariff on wine that's imported and sold in Italy, from
the U.S. to Italy,
right, of 20%, I don't know what it is, I'm making it up, but if it's 20%, now what Trump has done, what the government has done, is said, well, we're going to tariff your imported items that are being sold in the United States by the exact same amount that you're tariffing our items that are sold in your country.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
just
think,
called reciprocal tariffs, where it's a tariff of reciprocity. So if yours is 11%, ours will be 11%. He's just trying to even the playing field.
right,
And you mentioned the automotive ones. That's not speculation. I believe that goes into place. That 25%, I think, is happening April 3rd.
April
And I
3rd.
think that the companies have a little bit of leeway. I think they've got like a month or two to actually comply and figure out what they're going to do. I have to read up on that because some of the tariffs have different rules to them.
They
Uh,
don't. They
they
don't.
don't have, it's just
They
instant.
don't.
That's
And
it.
even if, right, even if they say we're going to build a plant here, their products are still going to be tariffed. It's because that's what they're all
Between now
doing.
and then.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's honestly, I look at this and I think, well, short term, it kind of sucks because there's a lot of, market uncertainty about the values of things and costs of things. And people are saying, but guys, if you don't, you know, there are always domestic alternatives to whatever, I can't say always, but probably. I don't know
Most
where,
of the
if you,
time.
well, if you wanted to buy, I wonder if there's any like TVs that are made domestically in the United States. I bet there aren't. But for the most part, like, so
No,
if
it's a
you,
good question.
right, if there was a US made alternative to the imported item, the US made alternative maybe couldn't even hit the shelves at Best Buy because the imported items were able to effectively undercut the price of, say, that TV, right? So if there's a TV manufacturer that's US based, which I kind of doubt if there are now, but it's US based, they probably were uncompetitive in a retail environment because the imported TVs were essentially able to make their products cheaper, labor costs and all the rest of it. And so they're undercutting US manufacturing. And there was I think, it's a Chinese manufacturer of cars that was building this massive facility in Mexico. And they were going to flood the US market with Chinese cars from Mexico. Kind of genius if you're the Chinese car manufacturer, if you ask me. Well, Trump said, if you do that, Chinese car manufacturer, we're going to tariff your cars by 100%. You're not going to be able to undercut the US market, because that's what they were going to do. They're going to flood the market. And by the way, the Chinese, from what I've been reading, build phenomenal electric cars. Anyway, so they were going to import their Chinese cars, undercut the domestic market because they're able to make the cars cheaper, because who knows what reasons, all kinds of reasons. And that would have trashed the ability for U.S., domestic GM, Chrysler. Well, Chrysler's now, part of the international conglomerate, but Ford, Tesla, they would be gutted because they couldn't compete with a lesser expensive product, because the lesser expensive product was arguably cheating to get their prices down in order to essentially destroy U.S. domestic manufacturing. And that's what's been happening for generations. And that's the reason, it's such an arrogant, snotty ass argument that people say we need to have, like, when it comes to immigrant workers, illegal immigrant workers, and people saying, well, if those illegal immigrant workers aren't coming to the United States, who's going to, pick
Who's going to build the houses?
and exactly, who's going to build the houses? Who's going to build the? Okay, well, I got news for you. The reason that it's not okay for what's happening is, here's all the reasons. There's a lot of reasons. Number one, if you guys think that Americans wouldn't want those jobs, you're wrong. What's happened is the builders, picking Julie's examples and as an example, her builder. If the builders are going to hire the best quality labor at the lowest price, so if an illegal is willing to work for less than a domestic worker, and his work product is similar, he's going to hire the cheaper guy every single time. And that happens with every kind of sort of labor. The market forces are always going to reward whoever the low cost producer of labor is in that particular point, right? So the illegal workers were coming here and they're flooding some of these markets with labor that U.S. workers couldn't compete with, because a U.S. worker has to pay taxes, because the U.S. worker is going to have more expenses. So the U.S. worker couldn't work for that same price as the illegal immigrant worker was able to work for. And so to say that you are essentially going to have, who's going to want to do those jobs? Americans will do those jobs. The hourly wage and what they're paying to do those jobs will increase, because they won't be undercut anymore by cheap foreign labor that has a different cost structure and cost basis, no taxes, getting paid under the table, things like that, than a
But won't that
domestic
raise
worker.
the cost of the house ultimately?
Yeah, it will. It'll raise the cost of the house, but what's that going to do? It's going to put more money in the pocket of the people doing the work. It's going to put
True.
more money in the pocket of the domestic, and the guy doing the framing. It's going to essentially reconstitute companies in the United States that have been gutted by all this. You guys hear this happening sometimes with like imported. I'll give you an example. I had this actually. I wasn't going to use this as an example, but it's a really great example. Somebody tried to get into it with me on Instagram about this very conversation, and they're in California, and they used the example of house cleaners. And I don't even know if this person realized what they were saying. A whole bunch of other people kind of chimed in after this person made this comment. In my neighborhood, the only people that are cleaning houses, and this I assume it was a gal, rattled off all these places where these maids are from, Mexico, Guatemala, and all these other places. And they're the only ones willing to do this work. And I said, well, how do you know that's true? And she said, then I said, well, what's the minimum wage if you were to hire somebody legally in California to do that type of work? What's the market, what would the market charge for that kind of work? And she didn't even know. I went to Grok and I did a little homework on it. It'd probably be about $30 to $40 an hour. And then essentially the illegal workers working for less than $15 an hour. So if the illegal worker was never there to provide the labor for essentially less than half off, then there would be then that means that the domestic worker would be able to get a job again. And yes, that person looking for a maid is going to have to pay more, but that means the money is going to stay in the United States. So there is going to be some temporary displacement of essentially reallocation of funds as prices do increase. But overall, what actually happens? Now, this isn't directly related to tariffs, but all I'm saying is this whole exploration into the ramifications of immigration or illegal immigration, it's not even immigration. Essentially, people, entering the United States is illegally. It's not really immigration technically. Immigration technically is people entering legally. But in any event, and tariffs and all these things. So you look at it from one legal or one political perspective, and it's easy to say, oh my gosh, prices are going to go up on everything. And who's going to, how much will avocado prices be? And how much am I going to have to pay the person cleaning my house? And, the cost through tariffs of new imported cars are going to go up. Well, here's your alternative. Buy a domestic made product, buy a car made by GM.
Excuse me. I think that part of the pushback on this is not so much as you lay it out. What you're talking about is running a business like a business. We're talking about builders or farmers growing avocados or whatever. And some of those things may change, like the cost of labor to build the house will probably go up. And people have said, well, the cost of lumber because of tariffs on Canada is going to go up. Well, we also have trees here. We have lots and lots of trees here. We have, lumber that will be reinvested in the US. So just because costs go up here does not mean necessarily that it has to keep on going up and raising on top and on top and on top, because
market
running a business,
market forces
find
an equilibrium. So market forces will determine what the cost of a framer is worth.
You'll save it somewhere else.
Exactly. And then so this is the thing that's you have to, the temporary pain, right, of going through this, essentially this change. Will be costs, rising, and you're going to go and you're going to say, oh my gosh, the new construction is increasing by 5% or 10%. Maybe the builders will absorb some of it. Maybe they won't. Oh my gosh, the cost of imported whatever is going to go up. But over time, what's going to happen is that money is going to stay in the United States. You're going to see a huge increase in the number of people that are gainfully employed. Please don't say Americans don't want to do the work. That's not true. It just, Julie and I are not that old that we remember when your plumber was not, an illegal immigrant, or the framer crew wasn't a crew of people that didn't speak English. I'm not saying anything bad about it. Please don't be reading.
No, but your point is that saying that Americans don't want those jobs is not.
It's a lie. Exactly.
Accurate. There are people of any ethnicity or age group or area who don't want to do those jobs. It has little to do. And there are people that do want those jobs. It's just like, the market will sort itself out and find its way. Probably temporarily, we're going to see some price increases. But to your earlier point, you also have some options, right? So I see it all the time. Like, we live in Puerto Rico. I see certain things we can buy on island less expensive. Other things, because we import a lot of things, we're paying more for. Like strawberries, and there are certain things that we don't get consistently. So when we have strawberries from California imported, yes, those we pay more for those than we pay for when they came from Florida. Is that because they were further, or because they were taxed differently, or because they cost more to grow in California, where the farmers had to pay more, costs, et cetera? So things will find their way. And also, I don't have to buy strawberries. Maybe I buy something else that's less expensive for a while.
Well, but that's
There's
the thing.
choices is the point.
Right. A tariff is, if you really think about it, it's a voluntary tax on
Yes.
consumers, unlike a lot of other taxes. Try to go in there and argue with a guy at the, the gas station, argue about paying the taxes on your gallon of gas, right? That's involuntary. Sales taxes are involuntary. Most taxes are involuntary. A tariff is a voluntary tax. You can choose not to pay it by A, not buying the product, B, not buying the product new, or C, buying a domestic sourced product with no tariff. So you
By
can
the
tell,
way, there are TVs that are US made. You can search that online. You can even search it in Amazon. There are usually companies you don't think of first, like Roku. We had a streaming thing on one of our cars from Roku, which you don't think of that first. You probably think of Samsung or something like that, but that's an American company. Vizio is an American-made big screen TV. Insignia, these are maybe not the number one companies, but you can decide to buy a big screen American-made TV if you want to.
and think about it. So those big screen American TV manufacturers, now that they're going to have an increase in demand, they're going to hire more people. They're going to make a better quality product. They're going to be able to actually be competitive globally because now they don't have guys. It's no different than if you have, most of you listening are real estate people that earn your living off commissions, right? So it's the same idea is if all of a sudden some company from pick your country came to your world and started undercharging a commission, they're going to list everything for $1 or $2 or $3. And the consumers perceive that it's a similar enough experience. Some of the consumers wouldn't, but some would. And the next thing you know, what happens to your business model? It gets eviscerated. That's what's happened from cheap labor and essentially the lack of tariffs. That's what's happened to our country really since the 90s.
It's become status quo. And I think that
has.
some of the pushback is simply fear of change, whether that's Doge cleaning house and downsizing different departments, or whether that's tariffs, or how new construction is handled, what your cost of things are at the grocery store. I think that status quo has been like that for so long that some of this is just, well, that's how we've always done it. So why would we want to change that? And I do think that that's at least somewhat a result of the country not being run by business people, whether that sounds political, I'm sorry, but they're making some decisions based on the finances. Why are we paying X, Y, and Z for these things like the what was it? The subscriptions to different, what do you call them?
There was like,
that weren't even being used.
They're called seats,
yes.
Right? Software seats.
It's like a license or something, right?
A license, right? So like, if you guys go and have a team or a brokerage, you know what I'm talking about. You'll go to whatever CRM company, let's say, for example, and you'll buy a main subscription. And then if you want to buy additional seats, you're going to have to pay an additional monthly fee. It turns out that there was so much software that was being they found one application, one software product where there was 60,000. It was one department in the government that had 60,000 seats that they're paying for every month and had been for a long time. And Doge got into the software application and found out like a total of 8 people were logging into it on a regular basis. But all this had to be paid for recurring on a monthly basis. No one was really paying attention, which, by the way, actually, y'all should be checking, making sure
cautionary tale, right?
Cautionary tale, right? The first quarter of every year is when you see a lot of these companies that will hit you with annual renewals, and they don't often send you letters or emails letting you know it's done. So make sure you dig deep into your credit cards and to see if there's anything that popped up. That we found a lot, that stuff we'd canceled in the past. By the way, Dropbox, I'm talking about you. Y'all should just stop trying to charge our cards. Nice try. Exactly. The dot loop was another one. We canceled that like 10 years ago. And sure enough, they tried
like every day for 10 days in a row because the year renewed and,
But that's what happens is these companies, and I can't imagine it's not illegal. It's probably somewhere in their terms of service that if you don't jump through a whole bunch of fiery burning hoops, that they can randomly try to hit your card. You guys got to be monitoring all of that. But in any event, that's what Doge is doing for the government. So really, when you're going through all of this consternation with regards to tariffs and all these other things that are, trying to be politicized, I want you to just keep in mind, what is really the outcome 5 years from now, 3 years from now? What's it really going to be like if, every family in the United States earning $150,000 isn't paying taxes? because the tariffs. What's going to happen to the amount of money that they're able to now to save? Where are they going to be putting that money? They're going to be spending it. Some of them are going to be saving it. All right. So if we all of a sudden are able to use tariffs to reduce, if not eliminate, income taxes on everybody, no matter what their income is, I want you to think about that. So won't that attract some of the biggest earners in the world to want to figure out a way to move themselves, and family and maybe their businesses to the United States?
Well, they've already proven that with that card you were talking about on the other day on the podcast.
Yeah, but that doesn't get them out of taxes, Julie. That's the golden visa thing. Yeah, they sold. That's a different conversation.
Okay,
but overall with taxes, what happens if all of a sudden there's no federal income taxes because all the taxes are being generated from tariffs? How many of you are really going to be all that politically triggered that it happened to have been a Trump idea that got rid of federal taxes?
No, you're going to love tariffs.
Yeah, if you're in California, for example, and we have coaching clients that earn over $1 million, but for every $1 million in California with state and federal taxes, you're paying around 50%. So you earn $1 million in GCI in California, 500,000 is going to various taxes. And that doesn't include the sales taxes and your property taxes if you have a home and all the rest of it, right? So if all of a sudden that person in California was no longer having to pay federal income taxes, I think their state tax was like 13% or something, but a big bulk of it's federal. What are they going to be doing? I know what they're going to be doing, buying more real estate. I know what they're going to be doing. They're going to be, building, new businesses. They're going to be doing all kinds of things. So returning the money back to the consumers, I hate that term, by the way. It's such a gross term, but returning it back to the citizens that have been paying it because we're now able to make it on a voluntary tax called a tariff. I don't know what the downside is. That seems like pretty rock star status to me. I love it.
Yeah, just the temporary pain to figure it out, and even then, it's not like, to your point, it's a voluntary tax. It's not like you woke up one day and your income tax all of a sudden you're in California and now it's 15% instead of 13%. That's involuntary. If you decide that you don't want to pay a higher price for a foreign car that's, not onshoring back to the US, buy an American car. You can do that. Buy a used foreign car. You can choose to do that. So to me, I like the power going back to the citizen.
Where this is really going to mess with things is, and again, it's this transitional time, because Julie, if you think about it, I mean, since we started talking about cars, how are you going to figure out lease residual values for cars in like all those types of things?
Yeah.
Think about
I was going to ask you that. How are leases affected by that?
No, obviously, if there's a 25% tariff, that's going to have to be factored into lease payments. But if you think about the ramifications of lease in values now, like you're going to have, if you're leasing a car right now and it's off lease in say a year to 18 months and the residual, your chances are you're going to have equity in that car that you wouldn't have otherwise had. In other words, the car's going to be worth more than whatever your lease payoff is because a tariff would have hypothetically cause the used value to increase. And you better be very conscientious of that because chances are the manufacturer's or the dealer's not necessarily going to let you know you've got equity. They're going to say, hey, Bob, why don't you trade it in on a new BMW? We'll get you a new lease. Well, it turns out that your old one had $15,000 of equity into it that you maybe not be getting the benefit of. So it's very interesting in this transitional period. People who think this tariff structure is temporary, it's not. It's definitely, when was the last time you guys saw a tax be put in place that was all of a sudden reduced or even removed? Has that ever happened? Never. So this tax that's getting put in place, these tariffs on everything, they're leveling the playing field globally. They're going, and why will this work long term? It's because the United States is the biggest honey hole for selling stuff on planet Earth. So if you want to sell something, you better be selling it in the United States. It does not matter what it is. And so if you're selling jeans or shoes or plastic items or cars or windows or whatever you're selling, you better be selling it in the United States because that's the biggest consumer market by an enormous margin. There are no comparisons. EU is in a big recession. England's a big mess, as far as what's going on in the economy, all these things. But the United States, if you're making your product, you want to be selling it in the United States, which means if you want to avoid the tariff because you want to be competitive with the domestic producer of said product, you're going to be building your manufacturing facility in the United States. That's going to take some time for us to see all the benefits from it. but I think it's extraordinary.
It's already happening. There's been a ton of reporting about companies that have decided to onshore or reinvest in the US, or, start building something that they were, about to launch in another country. That's easily Googleable, but it's also on whitehouse.gov. I think it's on the Doge channel of X. I think, what was it? GE was one of them, and the Honda was one of them. I mean, there's a huge list. It's so long that they've now had to alphabetize it.
Well, in Puerto Rico, Julie, there was, I think it was Act 130. I think it was Act 130. So back in Puerto Rico for the longest time was one of the, if not the largest manufacturer of drugs. So I said
pharmaceuticals.
That wrong. Pharmaceuticals. Yes, that's right.
You have to be specific.
Pharmaceuticals, yeah. So the big Pfizers and all the others were manufacturing their products here. And so when you go to Google Earth and you look at Puerto Rico, you'll see these just monstrous buildings that are all abandoned. Mm-hmm. And it's because what happened is that in the 90s, and so Puerto Rico was having a boom. All these manufacturers were here. There were tax incentives for foreign producers of drugs, and domestic, obviously, to manufacture their drugs in Puerto Rico. Well, Bill Clinton signed something back, and I don't remember what year it was, and got rid of that tax advantage. And you know what happened? Inside like 24 or 36 months, all of these massive manufacturers moved to Ireland, because Ireland said, aha, I know how we can get an advantage and we can become the global producer of pharmaceuticals. And they then essentially offered similar tax breaks that Puerto Rico was doing. And they are still to this day getting the big benefit of the manufacturing 30 years later. And now Puerto Rico, I think 2 years ago, has put a very similar act back in place. And sure enough, a lot of those companies are coming back to the United States. And I imagine, I would be shocked if there weren't tariffs against imported drugs very soon, which will even encourage more onshoring of manufacturing of even pharmaceuticals. So that's really fascinating. Oh, and what was it, Julie? Still, Puerto Rico is the global leader in producing masks. I think it is. Was it masks or was it syringes? It was one of the two.
Like that. Some kind of medical supplies. Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you often say, people and companies run by people go to where they're treated best. That's just a law of life. And, tariffs are one way to control that. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how all of that shakes down.
Well, the government uses taxes to control us.
Absolutely.
And the government was giving, here's something else I think was really fascinating, is that there was a $7,500 electric car tax credit. Everyone thought that it was Tesla that was trying to get that $7,500 tax credit. Elon actually didn't want the $7,500 tax credit because he didn't need it to sell his products. So the GM and Ford were the ones that were lobbying for the $7,500 tax credit so they could be more competitive against Tesla. I thought that was kind of fascinating. But yes, so what happens is that the governments forever have used taxes to try to control people's behaviors. And, I don't know. See, it's one of these, you and I have done a podcast topic 3 times about if you were just rich, where you no longer had to work for your money, your money was working for you, you're completely living off residuals or passive income from dividends or just whatever. You're no longer attached to having to earn money from having a job. And then the questions that you and I thought about when we were writing this topic would you live where you would live? Would you vote for who you voted for? Would you what wouldn't change in your life if all of a sudden you are massively financially independent? And it's really extraordinary when you really start putting your thoughts together as to how many of your decisions in life are predicated on having to keep a job. So if you have to keep a job and live in a particular community, then you're forced to pay these particular taxes. But if all of a sudden, and let's say you're in a taxi state right now, has a high tax rate, high property taxes, you're just getting bludgeoned every direction you go. Now all of a sudden you win the lottery. Now you're financially independent. You're not staying in that staying in that, tax abusive environment. You're going to move. You're moving to Florida. And so scale this to Florida versus Texas. They compete for companies. They're competing for people relocating from some of the more expensive taxing states. And so what Ron DeSantis came out. So we lived in Austin, so I can assure you that what I'm about to tell you is painfully true. Property taxes in Texas are terrible. They're just terrible. Yeah. Up near Dallas, Jules, isn't it the rate somewhere around 3%?
I think so. It depends on what county you're in, but yeah. I mean, we just paid almost $18,000 on a rental double It's not like it's
Are you
fancy.
kidding me?
I'm not kidding you.
That double that we
Uh-huh.
have in
Uh-huh.
Georgetown,
Yep.
18 grand.
17 something. Yep.
Oh
That
man,
is not a mansion.
that bad boy needs to be sold.
I know. That's what I
You
said.
should have told me.
Yeah, well, now I
Wow.
did.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, and I think that's between 2 and 3%. It's somewhere in there. But yeah, it's closer to Dallas and Fort Worth. They're pretty high too. And that's again one way that states compete is what you're taxed on and at what rate.
But DeSantis said, I'm going to make it so that in Florida, not only is there no state taxes, but there's no property taxes. And so what happens is, and Vic, say the last name, please. Ohio guy who runs for governor.
Just hang on. I have to get my brain working on it.
He was
Vivek
running for-
Ramaswamy.
Okay, Vivek
Right?
Ramaswamy. Okay,
that's right.
I'm not going to try it. Vivek. Okay,
This
so
call him
he's
Vivek.
okay. He's running for governor of Ohio, where Julie and I are from, and he said he wants to make Ohio a no state taxes state. And then he heard what Ron was doing in Florida, and now I heard rumblings that he wants to make it a no property tax state. So what's happening is these states are now having to compete in order to attract companies, and in order to compete to try to attract people that are financially mobile and can live wherever the hell they want to live. And that's what essentially is happening with regards to tariffs and all these other things. People are the states now are how many, like I remember I remember when Julie and I were selling real estate. Our first year, we sold over 100 homes, and our second year we sold between 100 and 200 homes. And we'd never earned a lot of money before. We never certainly, this was all new to us. And we got, after the first year, we started getting all these freaking tax bills from Rita. So
I swear to you, I thought that it was a scam. I'm like, who pays Rita?
Right.
Who is Rita?
So we kept on getting these little invoices, these little bills from Rita. And again, we were tax ignoramuses, so we didn't know nothing about nothing. And we got like, I don't even know, 20 or 30 of these damn things. And we just thought it was a joke. Oh, we got another, who's this Rita person trying to get us to pay some stupid taxes? Throw it out. Okay. We are young and dumb, and there you go. But all right. So it turns out old Rita was Regional Income Tax Authority. And so for every city we sold a house in, and we sold over 100 houses our first year, the city was able to track down that we sold a house there and then send us essentially income tax bill for the city in which we sold a house for. Now, granted, these weren't huge amounts.
No, well, they were between 1% and 2%, depending on the zip code
of the commission that we earned. And they went and figured out what the sale price was, what the commission was. They somehow got copies of the closing statements. They then all of a sudden were able to basically start invoice all the real estate agents that sold houses, and we didn't live there. We didn't receive any services there, but we earned income there from having sold a house there. I'm not really sure how that works, but there you go. And so like all of that sort of stuff that happens with regards to taxes and how the government goes about doing it, people, you guys wonder why people are having a hard time paying bills. Like $150,000 a year when I was growing up was a crap ton of money. If your dad or mom or dad earned $100,000 a year, you are living on, and nowadays it's so sad. That's hard. It's not in many cities after taxes. It's not even enough to make ends meet. And that's what's happened. People talk all the time about, like, when Julie and I were growing up, the assumption was that both the husband and the wife were working. Maybe the 2 generations prior to us, that wasn't the assumption. The assumption was if the woman wanted to work, she could work. If she didn't, the husband's income was going to be enough to earn.
You would be fine.
Right.
You'd still be fine.
And so what happened is that a lot of things happened societally, obviously. But what really happened was the cost of living from inflation and taxes started going through the roof, where one income couldn't meet the needs of all the taxes and the inflation. And so if you see when women started working, it was around the same time that the US came off the gold standard. And that's when inflation really started to kick in, around Richard Nixon's era. And that's when it became normalized for women to want to work outside of the house. But, they didn't really have a choice. I remember I was asking Julie's grandfather, he was in his 90s, Julie, when I probably asked him this.
So, yep.
And I asked him, because I hadn't really thought through this. I said, why is it that men and women, I'm wondering his perspective,
What you asked him, why does it take two incomes to run a household now?
His answer was kind of funny because I guess there's just a lot of neat stuff to buy.
There's more stuff to want, is what he said.
That's what he said. Yeah. Well, that is
Which
an
is
answer.
true.
But the truth is,
part of this also is a result of financing. Okay. So if you rewind back to our grandparents' era, you didn't have a 30-year loan. And the price of your house, I have my grandparents' real estate contract of two or three of their houses. The first one was $9,000. The second one was like $15,000. They paid half of it down and it was seller financing on the rest. So one of the reasons why college is more expensive, one of the reasons why houses are more expensive is because you can finance everything, because people now are not thinking as much about the purchase price as they are about the payment. And if you can have two incomes and one of them covers the house payment, the other one covers everything else, now you have a two-income household. It's all related.
but what happens societally if all of a sudden people could start living on one income again because they're moving to states where, and this is what's going to happen. It's inevitable. Mm-hmm. I want you to ask yourself this question, listener. If all of a sudden you're in, it doesn't matter, Minnesota or whatever, and let's say you have the ability to move to, you do have the ability. You could get a real estate license in Florida and you could move to Florida and you could give up winter and you could start selling real estate in Florida, the whole thing. You could do that if you chose to. I know there's a lot of moving parts to that, but you still could. And then all of a sudden you're living in Florida and there's no income taxes. And let's say you're earning less than 150 grand. So you have no state taxes, you have no federal income taxes, and you have no property taxes. And maybe before, when you're living in Minnesota, you and your husband or your wife or that both were working. And because you were working to pay all the taxes, you're working to pay the elevated cost of living. And now you can live in Florida on one income or maybe even less than one income. That's kind of extraordinary. And I can't, in our lifetimes, Jules, other than people just basically deciding to live out in the sticks, mm-hmm. You hear people saying it, that used to be like their retirement plan. They're going to live out in the country someplace, but other than that, there's never been a time where there could be an opportunity for people to, move to area. Now, why are the states having to be more competitive? Because in the United States, you have 50 states. And each of those states has to compete with the other states in order to attract the best, most viable businesses, but also individuals. And if you have the ability to sell real estate in Ohio, you can sell real estate in California, you can sell real estate in Puerto Rico, you can sell real estate wherever the hell you want to sell real estate. And a lot of people who have, web-based businesses, they can move wherever they want to. Or if you have a medical license, you can get pick up your dental practice wouldn't be a good example, but a lot of other, you could work for an existing practice of dentists in Florida if you don't want to. You guys get the point? That's what we're going to experience. I don't really know how all the chips fall, but it is really amazing how the states that have the most abusive taxes are going to they're going to have to hard reset the way they've been spending money. They're going to have to doge up their own states. And then they're going to have to basically figure out a way to treat their citizenry better, or people are going to leave. And,
well, they are. I mean, statistically, that's already happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you and I were talking about today at the gym. And I think it's kind of interesting and it's fun to be part of.
Well, and I think you're right that there will be, if you can fund your family's needs on one income, that's one thing. The other thing is, maybe you stick to two incomes and now you're able to start a company and hire other people because it's not at a 50% tax rate. You and I have both have friends and coaching clients, and we've talked to lots of people who find those high tax situations, which is all of Canada for one thing, but certainly in California and Hawaii, where they've just decided that's pretty demotivational. If you know that, okay, I know how to make, let's say you're a real estate person, the recipe of making another 100,000 a year or 500,000 a year or another million a year, but maybe you don't feel like doing all those transactions if you're going to have to give up 50%.
But Julie, it's not just the taxes, right? It's the time that it's going to take.
That's right. It's the time, the liability, the effort, the stress, all of those
opportunity costs.
Opportunity costs. So maybe you are super motivated, you know how to do all that. And maybe you should just think about getting your license in another state so that you can keep more of that.
But here's what happens, and this is sort of I think 30,000 mile or maybe even from
But
Mars view of things.
yeah.
You're going to have, let's say, for example, to use your example, you're going, you have two folks that are, relocating to an area where all of a sudden they're not going to have to pay federal taxes anymore. Their tax basis is a lot lower, but both of them want to keep on working.
Yeah.
And then what if the one starts as investing all of their income into the S&P 500?
For example.
So
Yes.
the ramifications of allowing people, that's not the way of saying it,
That is
but
what it is, though.
the ramifications of people having more choice, having more money to make more decisions doesn't mean they're just going to go out and buy the latest pair of tennis shoes. A lot of them are going to pay off debt. A lot of them are going to be doing more investing. Julie mentioned starting businesses. Some will do that, but what most of them will do is they're going to they'll buy vacations and all the rest of it. They're going to start investing, and you're going to see, guess what? The stock market go through everyone says, well, there's such a small minority of the people that are directly invested in stocks. That's not true. If you have any kind of, if you or family member is working for any sort of state or government, their pensions are almost always invested solely in the S&P 500. Well, you can invest in the S&P 500, and over the last 20 years, it's increased in value by 10.3% per year, which means if you, for example, let's look at Social Security as an example. If you are given, when you are born, the opportunity to invest $10,000 in the S&P 500 and opting out of Social Security, I've heard different people, but I did the math on this. So when Zoe was born, Julie, for example, you and I bought her a college savings, whatever the heck it was.
529. Yep.
All right. So we prepaid in Texas. So we prepaid the cost of her college tuition, no matter what the cost of college was going to be. When she ends up going to school, 18 years later, the money that we invested, which was $43,000, was going to cover whatever the cost was. So if the cost of college education had been $300,000 or $500,000, now, but here's what I did. We didn't do this at the time, but we should have. We should have taken that $43,000 and we should have put that in the S&P 500, and it actually would have been not only enough to pay for any cost of college, because I had Grok do a comparison of, for example, UT cost of annual tuition now, cost of annual tuition in 10 years or whatever. What would the cost be? And just do a cost analysis versus that kind of thing.
Sure.
And we would have been better off if we had just invested that money ourselves in the S&P 500, because we would have had control of the money. Because
that's true.
The 43,000 that we invested into that 529 plan, it gave us a little bit of a tax advantage. Who cares? But we don't get that money back. That money is like an insurance policy. Now, if she doesn't decide to go to school, you and I can use that money to, for our education, or we can donate it to other people for education, but you don't get a check, right? You're not getting, so we would have been better off. But I mean, so that's what's going to happen. A lot of times I think people are going to say, I've got this money that I was paying in taxes. I'm going to start investing it in the S&P 500, and I'm going to create generational wealth for myself. Because if you'd have taken, $10,000 or $1,000 when Zoe was born and invest $1,000 every year in the S&P 500 or whatever, by the time she's ready to retire, whatever the retirement age, it would be so much more than she'll ever get from Social Security. There's not even a comparison. But what's the pushback against that? It's giving Americans control of their own money. It's essentially making it so the Social Security, essentially the amount of money can't be a slush fund for excessive government spending anymore. So it's really fascinating when you see the pushback against logical ideas that are absolutely at the betterment of the country as a whole and individuals. It's people acting in their own self-interest. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I go back to my thought being that people are afraid of change and how it'll affect them. And, that could open up a can of worms about how do people make their decisions now? Well, that
taxes
also,
and security.
That's right. But also being told what to do and what to believe and how to believe it. And that gets down to like legacy media conversations and things like that. And also financial literacy being taught in schools. And there's so many different things that I think do, maybe inadvertently control people's behavior. That's what I think is interesting.
Use your parents as an example, okay? And I know they're not an extreme example, they're moderate. But Julie's parents are both school teachers. They're retired now, they're in their 80s, God bless them. And they're living off pensions. But I knew these guys when Julie and I've known each other since Julie was 15, and now she's, you
They were
know.
younger than our age now,
Yeah, we
which
exactly.
is weird to
So
think about.
I've known them for a long
Yeah.
time, and they were very moderate. Nowadays, they had been considered Republican, but they were Democrats, and they're school teachers, and they're part of the teacher union, and there were all these things. And I remember when we were growing up, there was a strike that was happening, and the teachers had to go, and the union was, and Julie's dad was a senior school teacher. He was somebody who was really well respected, a lot of prestige. He taught at the school for a long time. And so he had this, I think, mostly involuntary political position in the union. I think it was just
But they
something
trusted their union,
right. And they were being told to do things that they didn't want to do. And I remember talking to Julie's dad about this. They were supposed to go and protest and all this stuff. And none of the teachers wanted to do it. Like, none of them wanted to do it. None of them wanted to do it because it wasn't necessarily what they believed was the right thing to do, but because they wanted their jobs, because they wanted to have the protection of the union. They were being essentially coerced into acting in a certain way. You guys get the point? How many of your behaviors and how many of your thoughts, how many of the people that you vote for, the community you live in, are because you need to be supportive of the ecosystem that you're part of to provide yourself with financial security.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing. And if all of a sudden you have less need to be dependent on that, blob, you're going to probably make different decisions. I know you will. Everybody does. So that's the thing that I think is fascinating, that makes a lot of, to your point, Julie, about change. That's what makes people very nervous, because if all of a sudden individuals have more control over their financial destinies, they're going to make different decisions. And those different decisions are not going to be in the best interest of the existing power structures that are out there. And can I give you a real estate example that I'm thinking about? All right. I want to talk about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Okay.
And you and I have been studying this topic for probably 3 years, because when you and I have been coaching for obviously a long time. And when Fannie and Freddie went into conservatorship back in 2008, there was a whole bunch of misinformation put out about those entities that turned out not to be true, about their insolvency and all the rest of it. Just all the stuff.
They're going to fail if we don't bail them out, kind of thing.
Wasn't true. Fast forward, they're still in conservatorship 16 years later. And it turns out that they are not only not in any sort of financial disarray, never really were, but they're some of the most profitable companies on planet Earth. Like if you look at the profit they make per employee, even with their excessive number of employees, they're getting doged. It is incredible how much freaking money Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac make. Now, I have a question for you, dear listener. What's been happening to those profits? Well, on one of our past podcasts, we researched it. Up until 2019, the profits from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were being swept to the Treasury. The Treasury then was allocating those monies not for housing, but for certain green energy things, for certain, call them what you will. I'm not trying to be political, but the money was being earmarked for things. The profit was being taken from the shareholders. And by the way, the shareholders weren't these big billionaire hedge fund owners. The shareholders were people that had pensions, because Fannie and Freddie were bedrock stocks in any sort of pension fund. So grandma and, your mom and all these other folks, they had the money stolen from them when the government took over those entities. And then the government used those entities as slush funds for long periods of time. Now, fast forward over the 16 years that they've been in conservatorship, all kinds of other little honey holes have been carved out. And now the net worth sweep and all this stuff, that stuff ended. But what's happened is that there has been PMI companies have been run amok. All this politicization of the different ways that essentially, for example, PMI is a involuntary tax that you have to pay to protect not you, but the company that's issuing you the mortgage, right? So you have to pay this PMI. And has the PMI gone up or gone down since Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as a percent of the loan in conservatorship? It's gone up. Okay, so why am I telling you all this? And all the people that are making arguments that interest rates on mortgages will go up if the Fannie and Freddie are now privately owned. All these expense fears, they're going to make it so poor people can't buy houses and all this stuff. Look at all the doom and gloom that the existing folks that are benefiting from the companies being conservatorship are trying to pump into mainstream media. It's extraordinary. We did some research, of course we did. And we found out that a lot of the biggest mouthpieces for the anti-release of Fannie and Freddie were the ones that are literally making the most money personally from the companies being in conservatorship. It's extraordinary.
It is.
Yeah, and that was such an exploration into sort of like looking behind the curtain, red pill, blue pill kind of thing. And then it's just from there, you then realize all the benefits that are going to happen for everyday normal consumers when Fannie and Freddie go back into private ownership. There's going to be more mortgage products. There's going to be more competition because JP Morgan and other companies said they're going to start competing with Fannie and Freddie to offer more mortgage products. The interest rates will go down. That's already been proven in a bunch of different analysis. There's no reason to believe interest rates will go up. It's not true. The people say that interest rates will go up are saying it's because the credit rating of Fannie and Freddie will, will degrade, and that will cause the investors to want to, they essentially blah, blah, blah. The cost structure will increase.
No, and the reason it's not going to degrade, who was it? Fitch or somebody said that.
Yeah, but let me finish the point, Julie.
Go ahead.
Fitch actually came out and said, no, we will not downgrade Fannie and Freddie credit rating if they're privatized. So whoever's saying that is lying, based on what Fitch said. So all of these naysayers that Fannie and Freddie going back into being private again, they're all reading from their own scripts because of the fact that they're getting financial benefit. I'm sorry, Julie, what were you going to say?
Well, the reason, I think one of the reasons that Fitch stated was because of the assets that Fannie Mae has on the books. They're not considered even remotely high risk should they come out of conservatorship. So for example, just how rich are they? Last year, they had $4.3 trillion in assets. They are literally the largest company in the United States. And they are the, 27th largest, of the Fortune 500 companies. They are the 33rd most profitable company in the entire world. I think they're going to be okay, right?
Yeah, so for people,
it's massive. I mean, trillion. We're talking trillion.
Yeah, and so when you guys go and you hear these, there's usually two or three of these experts that the news media will pull in. They'll quote New York Times or whatever saying, blah blah blah, says mortgage interest rates will go up. Why? It's a theory. You've not modeled it out. And then when you do some exploration on this, you'll find major lenders and major government institutions. A lot of them are fantastic, by the way, especially at modeling. None of them are predicting interest rates are going up. And yet, for some reason, the big news media outlets want to highlight the people that are wanting to keep Fannie and Freddie in conservatorship. I wonder why. It's because the profits are being swept to things that will have been an interest to certain sectors of constituents of the media outlets or political constituents. And so all this is the thing trying to keep the thing fed forever. Yeah. And it's just fascinating when you start to unravel all of it. And anytime you hear, here's one of the things I've learned, anytime you hear anybody saying that they're for the, I'm doing this for the first time buyer or, the minority buyer, or anytime they're trying to act like their belief structure is designed to uplift the downtrodden, I have not yet found an example where that's not a lie. They're using that as an excuse to try to trigger you to simply say in your mind, well, holy tamale, obviously we can't raise house payments on. Okay, so you get rid of PMI or reduce it dramatically. Mortgage payments go down. Did you know that, dear listener? Did you know if all
by a lot, by a huge spend, not just by the payment, which you could certainly take advantage of, but also by the spending power that it would allow you. I mean, it could be the difference between a first-time buyer being able to buy at all because they didn't have PMI. Now they can spend enough to buy the average first-time buyer house in their market might be 425. And with PMI, they couldn't afford that, but now they can, and as you go up in price, it just goes up, of course, exponentially, the impact that it has. If you want to help the first-time buyer or the low-end buyer, take PMI off.
Or just dramatically reduce it,
or reduce it, use a different percentage for it.
Yeah. I mean, and have the mortgage company, if they want insurance, pay it for themselves and stop passing it on to the consumer. All these things that have essentially become non-negotiable. Like I said, they're hidden taxes. They're like going to the gas pump and you see where all the little tax stamps are. Those are all the little gas taxes that have been added to your gallon of gas. And that's what's happening with mortgage payments, but you didn't know it, did you? It wasn't disclosed. What we have to disclose that you gave the seller a pack of gum but they don't, mortgage companies and all these government institutions.
Yeah, it's always on the back end behind the paperwork, isn't it? Is
Yeah,
that
and
interesting?
and that stuff is really fascinating to sort of watch become unraveled in the people that are fighting against it. Yeah, but so what's the motivation of the people that want to have Fannie and Freddie, as an example, released from conservatorship, or the people that want to have, that are the governors of states and are wanting to reduce taxes and make themselves more competitive, or the government that wants to tariff up different industries to make U.S. companies more competitive? What's the motivation? What's the ultimate motivation? It's to make America more competitive. It's to make their states more competitive. It's to make what they're selling, which is, if I'm Ron DeSantis, it's going to be moving to Florida, more attractive, right?
Yeah.
It's to, if I'm, the Trump administration, it's to make it so that the domestic manufacturers could start producing domestically again, pay a reasonable, fair market wage to U.S. consumers. Because here's the other thing that's very fascinating. Well, there's so many things about this that are fascinating. If you're making, for example, shoes, like the shoe industry was eviscerated in the 90s. And I remember everyone was talking about U.S. price or shoe prices are going to drop. And every single you try to find a pair of shoes that are made in the United States, they don't exist anymore. But back before the 90s, all shoes were made in the United States. So now that shoes are going to be tariffed, right? And foreign shoes are going to cost more than domestic shoes. You're going to see, guess what? A lot of the foreign manufacturers, or Nike, for example, who is making their shoes in Vietnam, they're going to start making them in the United States. And their shoes they're going to have to start either reduce their margins, or they're going to have to start paying they're going to have to start paying the market wage for the domestic worker to make shoes. Will that mean that your shoe prices increase? Yes, probably. Will it increase as much as if they left the shoe manufacturing in Vietnam because of the 25% tariff? No. But what happens over time is market forces, because there'll be more competition locally. It won't just be Nike making their shoes here. It'll be Adidas. It'll be all these other companies. And now all of a sudden, market forces, after we get through this little jinky period, are going to, it will force prices down on products. And manufacturing will evolve and things will become more efficient. And these are the types of things that happen when you are allowing competition really to be as level playing field as you possibly can. I'm tremendously excited about it. For the first time in my adult life, I can say I can see a clear path forward where the United States is going to be reconstituting all of the tenets of what made the United States magnificent before. Manufacturing, the housing is the American dream. It's just extraordinary. We were almost living in the shadow of what had made America great, right? We were almost, most of our adult life, Julie, you and I were living in the shadows of the generations that came before us that made America great. The greatest generation.
Yeah, like post World War II, all the great things that happened there and were built. And yeah, I mean, I think people get stuck on, like, if we go back to new construction for a second, they get stuck on, the cost of labor and things like that. But the other thing that's happening in the background is they're reducing all the regulations and all the different taxes. And I think it was something like, if you're building in California, there's something like 20 different types of taxes and permits, and they even have excise taxes and all of these things that have been layered on layered and layered on top of what it takes just to break ground. So if a lot of that goes away, that can certainly offset some of the things that maybe tariffs are going to create. And I think really what it comes down to is a great transformation of how we're doing things again, instead of feeling like we can't do things again because, well, I would do that, but it's just too costly to do that. So I think it's going to be a transformation, and it is certainly going to take fair bit of time to see where it's really going. But it's fascinating to study, and I think that even 5 or 10 years from now, looking back, seeing how all of this transformed the country, and I'm glad that things are moving pretty quickly. Got a lot of stuff to do. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time, certainly to be in real estate, because all of the things are now going the right direction. We did a podcast last week about why we're on the edge of a 25-year boom that has really no hurdles to acting that way. Usually when there's a boom, people say, well, I can only go on like that for so long because it's got to crash because of all of these things. But we pretty much took that apart and put it back together on our previous podcast this week. So I think that's really exciting. And, I'm just super proud of all of our coaching clients that are grasping that and are saying, you know what, this is going to be a great year. Maybe we had a little slow start in the first quarter. We had snowstorms, we had higher interest rates, we had all these things. But right now we're seeing more sales, we're seeing lower rates, and a lot more enthusiasm. I can tell you, just being fresh off of coaching calls this week was significantly more positive than I've seen in the first quarter-ish of this year.
Let me make this final point, and then I do want to talk about what you're talking about. So societally, culturally, there's going to be a shift that's going to happen, because right now, most societal norms are formulated and solidified in the coastal hubs where there's the highest density of populations, right?
Sure.
Now, if all of a sudden manufacturing is returning to the United States, and all of a sudden these, states in these sort of semi-rural areas or big city adjacent areas become hubs for manufacturing, hubs for employment, become the new desirable places to live. Like Julie, AJ and his wife, they're talking about moving to, what's that place in, you remember? Arkansas, but it's a town where Walmart is based.
Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, that's a great example though.
It is. It's a Walmart is based in this particular town where the family is from, that started Walmart, and it's this fantastic town that they've a whole bunch of money has obviously been pumped into the communities and the libraries and all that. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see societal norms move away from the types of things that we've been experiencing for the last probably 10 years. And we're going to see it become more moderate. And I think, like, if you look at someone like Bill Maher, for example, he's sort of, he's kind of talking about the same thing. He's Bill Maher's, people will say he's a left-wing loony. He's not. I mean, if you listen to Bill Maher, we went to
it's actually pretty reasonable.
Yeah, we went to a taping of him in LA. This was a long time ago. And oh my gosh, it was so funny. Julie and I were the only conservative people in the audience. And the audience was way more liberal than Bill Maher was. And so it was so fascinating to be in the audience and listen to see how they reacted to him, and how he had to force himself to ignore all their sometimes booing of some of the things he would say. And this was like a decade ago. But I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a shift away from a lot of these sort of extreme types of beliefs and behaviors to a more normal, because as these new hubs for manufacturing start to become more influential on the country as a whole, the values that those people have will also become more influential in movies.
But that's going to take time to play out. Right now, everybody's just suspicious. They're like,
for sure.
Why would you fire all these people? That's bad. They're just suspicious and I think still a little triggery about things. It's going to take months and maybe even, a year or two to see the positive effect, especially of your own local economy. And I mean, one thing that happened almost immediately is the price of eggs has been coming down for like 3 or 4 weeks, right? So that's an immediate thing. You can say, oh, well, maybe that was a good thing. Maybe we didn't have to just keep killing chickens when the bird flu thing went away.
Right.
Maybe we should just stop that now that the chickens are starting to be healthy again. Oh, that's a good thing. I can't really pick on that because I buy eggs every week. So there's going to be little micro things that you can put your hand on and say, oh, okay, I can get behind that. But maybe seeing the effect of tariffs, or I think the town you're thinking of is Bentonville in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And maybe, you see a big impact of that in Bentonville. And maybe in Ohio, if Vivek gets what he wants, then Ohio's going to be like, oh, you know what? Maybe we really can stop being just known as a Rust Belt state. And maybe we're going to attract even more investment. And maybe Ohio's going to be more of a thing that it's been for the past 20, 30, 40 years. So I think that we're going to get out of that overly critical thing. And I'm sure that there will be mistakes along the way too, but go ahead.
But Vivek said he wants to make Columbus, Ohio, and specifically a manufacturing hub for chips, for computers, for things. So the offshore
a tech center,
a tech center, and he will absolutely do it. He's going to,
I think so.
I have no doubt he's going to do it. But what impact when all of that, like the Ohio values, which are our values basically, what impact will those have societally over time as more communities similar to Columbus start to essentially be these big employment hubs, even towns we haven't thought of before. I'm obviously formulating all these thoughts, but it is interesting where all this could go in terms of 20 years from now. I
Well,
think it's exciting.
I'm excited too, and I'm very interested to see culturally the changes. And I think it would be great as a country if we could unite behind a lot of these positive changes and celebrate being American again. You know, like there's nothing as American as we're watching the Dallas Cowboy training thing, the cheerleader training thing, right? That's like, I guess I didn't realize how like purely American that is. It just from a standpoint of like here's these girls doing their routines and wearing their outfits and everything, but they actually have like very I guess conservative values, family oriented values. They have an incredible work ethic, the things that they have to learn and do and memorize. It's pretty fascinating. So I think that we've got like financially, societally, politically, we have all of these different elements that are starting to congeal. And that's what I think is very interesting to see what direction that's going to take us in as a country.
And they're like the doom and gloom that was supposed to happen in Washington, D.C. isn't happening. We have some great coaching clients there, and they're telling me that market's really kicking butt. So there's
for sure.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating, really how all this is going to work out. And this all goes back to, I think, the inevitability of the fact that we're at the very beginning stages of a 25-year, it's going to be a generational housing boom. Julie and I think, have given really good points as to argued our points really well. We did 3 shows on it about why we believe that's true. But really the bottom line is, you want to not listen to all 3 hours of it, would be simply demographics. I mean, really demographics
on a very basic level. Yeah.
Right. Demographics and someone in comments said, well, what about the lack of, population and, baby replacement humans, and we're not making enough, all the rest of it. Well, how much of the fact that people aren't making babies has to do with the fact that they are not financially secure, because the fact that they're having to pay too much in taxes and both of them have to work and they can't figure out how to make ends meet? And how much of that has to do with, those types of financial insecurities? Because we know that people do put off having children until they feel financially secure. That's usually how people go about making decisions about when to start families. Makes sense, I guess.
And also when they buy their house.
Right, exactly. And so what if all of a sudden people start feeling more secure? Well, you're going to see more babies. What if all of a sudden people start having more consistent income? Well, they're going to buy more houses. They're going to, all these things. But
don't forget all the pandemic babies that are coming.
Exactly. No, I think they've been done born yet, haven't they?
Yeah, but that generation will be coming up.
That's true.
Like
the
what did
babies.
We've been out of the pandemic for almost 5 years, so give them another 15, and that's still within your 25-year housing boom.
Yeah, well, and there's probably going to be some interesting incentives for folks to, start families and have more children. You're seeing that in other countries too. But if you want to compare the birth rate in the United States versus the birth rate in other, let's say, Western countries, I believe there's one country that has. Can you Google that real quick, or you grok it real quick?
Possibly.
But I believe we have the top 1, 2, or 3 of all birth rates of Western countries. So we will, obviously, because of the demographics and because people feel more financially secure, you'll probably see family formations start to increase, and you're going to see the number. So yes, one of the potential black swans would be the lack of replacement humans. And I don't think that's really a major concern. Julie touched on why, some of our optimism might be misplaced. And that would have been the only reason we could come up with prior. And while Julie's doing that, I'm going to tee us up for our next little mini topic. So as Julie said, and it's definitely true, and you guys can read the housing headlines, especially over the next week or so, the housing market is definitely coming back. Thank God. Last year, we are praying, and hopefully and I mean literally praying, and I hope you guys are as well, that last year was the bottom of the housing market, and we have nothing but blue sky ahead of us. And it's not going to be a rocket ship. It's going to be a slow building, and you're going to share with them what you just learned from your Googling.
Well, I have to go through all of the different country ratings, but you're right. It's not as bad as previously reported. There's I'm not even through the whole list, but there's at least 25 countries that have a lower birth rate than the U.S. So that's not really a thing. But yeah, go back to.
Turns out people like to have sex and make babies.
This is why we have 4-bedroom homes.
Yeah, in
thing.
bunk beds. All right, so back to housing. So yes, we do see lots of reasons to believe. Again, we're always looking for reasons to think, oh, Tim and Julie's 25-year housing boom, generational housing boom prediction is wrong. Well, I don't think so, and I think you're actually going to start seeing real obvious signs starting today. So, Julie, you were telling me that you are worried about some of the agents that have their emotions stuck in a quagmire, thinking and not being cognitive of the fact that the market has changed.
Yes. I have felt for a while that many, not everybody, but the collective unconscious, shall we say, of people who are supposed to be making a living in real estate has been that things are slow and things are hard. And I think for really almost 3 years, there has been some truth to that. We've had higher rates as we were pulling out of the pandemic. Rates went up, slowed the market down. We've had stagnant inventory. It's been competitive when something good does hit the market. It has been tough. But the unintended consequence of believing that for so long is that you might not be seeing the market turn around. You might still be stuck in your head that, oh, it's tough and it's going to be a while and sales are down. And, I keep hearing these reports that we're only going to sell 4 million homes this year again. And I have many examples where what that's caused is when there are really highly motivated, ready to rumble, highly qualified buyers and sellers who want you to help them now. Agents are almost in disbelief that that could be possible, and I even have examples of really good, strong, competent agents that because a lead or leads presented themselves in that way, their impression was, that's got to be too good to be true. What's up? What is up? And they almost lost it because they just didn't, they weren't in the mindset to grasp that low hanging fruit. And we're seeing more of that in the market, in my opinion, based on my cross section of coaches and coaching calls with my own clients. We're seeing that heat up. Now, is that because we have a little bit of a delayed spring market due to blizzards and things like that? Is it because our rates are now settling in below 7% and hopefully inching lower?
I think it's
and lower?
optimism.
I think it's optimism. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think people, if you recall back to, and I'm not comparing this to the housing crash because it's different to have a crash in the number of sales, totally different than housing price crash. But you'll remember back then where we had maybe 3.5 years of short sales and foreclosures and doom and gloom in the market. And like everybody knew house was for sale and they were all losing money. And we all had to be remember frugality fatigue, where it seems like just one day, the collective unconscious decided that we'd have enough of that. And it's okay to buy houses again. And maybe it's okay to pay list price again. Maybe I don't have to lowball and see and deal with,
Julie, have you ever thought about what you just said? Have you ever actually thought about it?
What do you mean? Yes.
Well, I mean, you said collective unconscious, and that's a little too woo-woo for me, but have you ever thought about like what that is truly all about? Like, so the concept is that, and Julie just said it, and you guys have all experienced this. How is it that we go from one storyline and then the next day you wake up and there's almost like a completely different storyline that we're all living?
Yeah. I think that's really fascinating.
It is fascinating. And we've seen this. I mean, Julie and I have a combined age of 109. So we've seen this happen in meaningful ways in the country quite a few times, where all of a sudden, like, it goes from almost day to day or week to week, people are feeling and thinking one way, then all of a sudden they start thinking and feeling another way. And you could be led to believe that there's some sort of like, source code that's all interconnecting all of us. And all of a sudden there was a software update. But I think it's more basic than that. Julie mentioned frugality fatigue. That's when people just got sick of being frugal. But I think what happens is that there's certain folks in society that people pay attention to. And when those folks start acting and talking differently, that all of a sudden people start following their leads and they start essentially mirroring that behavior. And you might be one of those influencers, a true influencer in your marketplace, but I think that's really truly what it is. I have a hard time believing it's something spiritual.
No, but it does
manifests that way. It does feel that way.
It seems like there's, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's like all woo woo or anything necessarily, but I think that once the word gets out that like a certain mindset is starting to take root, like things are getting better.
What are we doing, Jules? I mean,
Same
think about
thing.
it. Right. Where we're doing that,
Yeah.
right? So you and I
Yeah.
were making all these observations and we formulated the idea that we're at the start of a generational housing boom. Nobody said it. We didn't read it, but we were picking up little breadcrumbs that led us to believe it
Yeah.
was true. And then you and I spent too much time trying to kind of put together our argument why it's true. And then we tried to come up with an argument why it wasn't true because we
Right.
wanted to make sure that we
Check our
were
facts.
exactly. And now what we're doing is we're trying to help all of you to understand why what we're saying we believe to be true. And if you make that your true, if all of a sudden you believe we're at the beginning stages of a generational housing boom, your behavior is going to change.
That's right. That was my original point with when there's opportunity in front of you that's really good. I feel weird saying good quality business, but people that are truly motivated, qualified, and open to you helping them, which is your job in real estate, to recognize that for what that is. And maybe that's the beginning of more is coming your way like that, instead of having your stance continue to be, oh, things are too hard and that's too good to be true. And I just that call, I don't know if I should call a person back and things like that.
So why are they acting like that? Think about this. So what was the year that we sold 6.3 million homes? What year was that?
2021, I believe.
Okay, 2021. All right, then after that, it dropped and then it dropped and then it's basically, okay. So if you got your license in the last 3 or 4 years and you've only been selling real estate, which is realistically speaking, Julie's probably a third of our listeners and viewers on YouTube right now.
Probably, yeah.
That you have only known this particular market.
That's right.
You don't have the experience to know when the market's changing. Your spidey senses.
I guess that's my point. Yeah.
That is your point. So what Julie is trying to have all of you guys realize is the market is changing. Wake the hell up. And you better basically
in a good way.
Well, right. Or you're going to miss the opportunity because to what Julie was saying, I believe she was saying, correct me if I'm wrong, dear, is that if you're not consciously making the most of this new housing boom, it will pass you by and you won't realize it's passed you by until years later. And that's not what we want for any of you. No. So if you believe that we're at the beginning stages of a 25-year housing boom, a generational housing boom, if you just have accepted to your core that that's true, you're not going to look for reasons not to believe it anymore. You're not going to be a skeptic anymore. What are you going to be doing differently today? What are you going to be reading? Who are you going to be listening to? What are you going to be talking to? Are you going to be at the same brokerage? Are you going to be believing the same things? Are you going to be believing that your best days are in front of you or your best days are behind you? So really at the end of the day, when you want to feel optimism, if you want to feel enthusiasm, you've got to really isolate yourself from anything and anyone that makes you even remotely believe that your best days are behind you and that if anyone is trying to piss in your ear at all ever, that tomorrow is not going to be better than today, you need to remove them from your life, especially when it's political. Because a lot of these people that are saying that tomorrow is going to be worse than today because Trump's president, they're the ones that are going to miss 10 years. And they're the ones that when we're all, doing podcast number 4,000 or 40,072. And, I'll read a message that someone messaged us from Instagram saying, I wish I would have listened to you guys back in 25 in March of 25, because, I let my perceptions of this and the other thing clouded the opportunities. Now it's 10 years in the future. And I realize what I could have done with my life. Yeah. And how do I know this is true? Because we experienced that with a lot of you. Right. After the housing crash, a lot of you,
and we also experienced it going into the housing crash with agents that resisted thinking that could possibly happen in their market. That was a big problem back then, where because it started like in Inland Empire in California, for example, and because Palm Desert and I live in Columbus now. That's not going to happen because we're in the Midwest. We're more solid than that. And it didn't happen to the degree, but it still happened. And it took some agents just flat out washed out of it because they took too long. They didn't change their skills and they went away. And then when we came out of it, the same thing was happening. We remember when we used to get panic calls from REO agents that had only done REOs for like 3.5 solid years. And they'd had listing presentations before, but it had been so long. And now I've got like a real listing presentation and I have to compete and it's luxury and it's out of my price range. What do I do? That was a really common coaching client to come to us on the back end of the housing crash, which were agents rebuilding. So we've seen it both on the downfall and on the upswing. I have a strong feeling just from a coaching standpoint. I think you would agree that we are on the edge of an upswing because of all these little inklings that we see when you talk to agents.
You're talking about
all the
now.
time.
You're
Yeah.
talking about now, but what Julie and I are predicting is we predict that this, again, don't say when I say
It's not going to be
boom,
like that.
no, it's not gonna be like that. It's gonna be a lot of false starts. It's gonna be like, taking baby steps. But the wind is finally starting to move from the front of you, where you're feeling like you're having to push all this extra effort just to kind of, walk. And now it's starting to shift. And now in many of you, it's on the sides now. So it's a little breezy, but it's soon going to be at your back, and you're soon going to be able to accelerate even faster. But what some of you are doing is, even as the wind is at your backs, you're psychologically turning around so the wind is still pushing you back. You're just going in a different direction now. What you getting what I'm saying here? So you've got to just move past the malaise, the doubt, the self-doubt, this, all the things. And I'll say this too. This is something that's going to be very confusing for a lot of people. Is that the things that worked in the past, to lead generate in particular, will not work in the future. We've talked about that a lot, and it's a huge topic, and I don't want to necessarily get into it today. But if you have been building your business predicated on the idea that branding and social media and advertising and marketing was going to be the long tail opportunity for you to lead generate, you're wrong. I don't want to even sugarcoat it anymore. And I'm not worried about it offending anybody, because it's absolutely 100% true that AI is going to make it so that anybody and their brother and their dog, it might be a good day to show everyone Max, by the way, anyone and their brother and their dog can easily replicate a dominant social media presence, have a dominant social media presence on any platform. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but that's what's happening now. And that's what's going to happen everywhere within this year, for sure. You're going to be able to go online. You're going to have an avatar of yourself created, your voice, your likeness, your face. And then all of a sudden, your avatar is going to be replicating the best, most viewed videos in your marketplace by agents that have put all their blood, sweat, and tears into making these videos. Oh, it's just going to be someone in front of an AI thing. You will not be able to tell. It is one for one. It is indistinguishable. Oh, it's just going to be an AI that's going to be talking about some whatever boring stuff. Nope. The AI is going to go, and it's going to find, and it's going to do searches on YouTube. It's going to find what the most downloaded, viewed videos are that are in alignment with what you're trying to attract. Let's just say sellers in ABC neighborhood. It's going to see the videos that are being actually consumed, and then it's going to give you a script. It's going to then feed it into your avatar, and it's going to, with your voice, make a video that's a replicant of the video, maybe even make it better, that's already getting all the downloads. It's then going to load it to Instagram and YouTube and all the others, and then, Reels. And the agents that are spending all their time right now trying to be real estate influencers are going to be devastated. I, again, cannot come up with an argument why that's not true. Come up with one. Please tell me why I'm wrong. I'm not trying to be right. I don't want to be right. I want to tell agents what they can do to protect themselves and their families. I'm not self-righteous. I'm not trying to sell you into this, that, or the other thing. I'm truly not. I just don't see that as a real solid way forward. And where's all this go? It's going to always go back to personal contact, your ability to have meaningful conversations with people, how to convey information that they put value on in a one-to-one manner. And everything else is going to be delegated. Everything else is going to be relegated to AI for sure.
And it doesn't matter what price range or what area of the country you are, because it is AI, it's going to be everywhere. And what would you say the real early impact you're going to see, like 4 to 6 months, maybe? What's your feel?
Now,
I mean, a lot of this stuff exists now. It's just getting better.
Well, I mean, now, so what's going to happen is that there's, after we do this, pod, it's going to go on YouTube. It's going to, the reels will go on Instagram, and all that's being done by AI. Our reels are done by AI. Someone on our staff oversees it. And then what's going to happen is that the companies that are making AI agents are going to know that we are talking about AI. And then their AI is going to solicit us through Instagram, asking if we're aware of their product and how it works. Okay. And so all of this is being done in the shadows and being done automatically, not being done by humans. I got someone sent me, Rich sent me this white paper, very well written, about his thesis about why agents are not going to be relevant in the future. And I don't want to peel all the layers back, but the gist of it is is that agents are going to be more caring, competent, skilled agents are going to be more in demand than ever before because of the technology is going to essentially, and what we talked about with the economy is going to increase housing demand. Julie and I did some homework based on population growth, based on our 25-year housing boom thesis, based on all the things about what the increase in housing demand is going to be. And what would we figure, Julie, 10 million home sales per year by, and like how there's going to be a demand for more real estate agents, not fewer real estate agents. But when anyone, and this will never be bred out of humans, is that when you're coming up to an important decision, you want to have a caring, competent, skilled professional that's going to help you make that decision. You might have AI that's going to help you fill in the gaps of your thinking, but you're going to want to talk to the professional. And real estate is not like Ginsu knives or coffee or something. Real estate is all different. It, like where Julie and I live in Puerto Rico, we live in there's 8 villas. We're in number 8. There's 7 other villas that are very similar to ours, but they're all massively different because they all sit on the land differently. They all have different views. All of them catch the light in the morning and the evenings differently. All of them have ocean views, but some of them more than others. All of them this and the other thing. So to say, well, each of those villas are the same because they're more or less model matched, and so they're all priced the same. I can tell you our place was built in 1993. That's not how the market's treated these. The market's treated all these differently based on the view, based on the other things, right? And so that's something that AI—
It's the human touch. You could only know that because you've been in most of them,
right?
Because you walk the street every day. AI can say, well, they're all model matches, and here's a few comps.
Cost per square foot.
And they all basically have the same view, but that's not the same. So the way I think of AI, at least so far, is the world's greatest multitasking assistant that we don't have to pay.
Yeah, totally.
And that's how I see a lot of coaching clients using it too. Like they may use it to do maybe 80% of their research, and then they have 20% overlay of their own personal experience that makes it that much better. And that's why they get paid. What they get paid is because they're bringing that, and because they're a problem solver and they have that special human touch. So I think of it as like top producers powered by AI. And I don't think agents are going to be replaced by AI, but agents who use AI at the highest level, or even at a high level, will replace agents who don't. That's how it seems to be panning out, at least so far.
And the social media aspect and all the posting and the videoing and all the branding and all that stuff, it'll become easy to do. Personally, I think that stuff's fun. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But it'll be easy to do. It'll become ubiquitous. Everyone and their brother and their dog will have their own, our daughter's got a YouTube page, and she does, what is it, Julie, that she's doing? But her little videos of, some Japanese
packaging. She does, some of them are arts and crafts and drawing, and sometimes it's that weird ASMR sounds when you're unpackaging something. And
she never uses her likeness. You don't see what she looks like, so don't worry, we're not being bad.
It's like a zoom in of her unwrapping some cool toy or something. I don't know.
And that gets so many views. It's bonkers. And it just—
She had a series about fairy videos where she was using her phone to make it look like her little feet were flying through a field. You never saw her. You just saw like her flying over coconuts and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah,
she's got another series she's going to work on with Max. So
she shows me these videos. And I go like, damn, Zoe, your little silly reel is getting more views than Mom and I's reel. And it's so funny. It's like, what kind of weirdos are watching all of this? Uh-oh, here comes Max. Max is our gigantic French bulldog.
I actually had a couple of coaching clients ask to see him, I'm trying to get him on camera. Hey,
yeah.
Max.
And he is that big. He wants to give Mom a kiss.
How's it going, Max?
Well, so listen, guys, all this stuff that we're talking about, now we're getting to the silly zone. Remember, it's Free Friday, so we're allowed to talk about whatever we're into. But where this all goes is when everyone essentially looks and feels similar, when everyone's got 1,000 followers and 6 billion posts and, whatever. Where is it? How are you going to differentiate yourself? Ultimately, it's going to be the quality of your relationships and the quality of your ability to talk with folks. And the social media and whatever, what that's going to play, what that will be is where people go to research you. So I know Julie from the gym, and my home is about to expire, or I just found out I'm getting relocated and I know she's got a real estate license. I'm going to go and check her out and learn more about her. And that's what people use it for. And it's cool. I mean, that's awesome. Sure. I love it. But it's always going to come, most of the transactions. And by the way, this isn't just for real estate, it's for everything. Most everything is sold through personal connections. And we gave you the statistics on all of that before. But the bottom line is 90% of all purchase decisions for products, well, primarily for services, are made based on who you know, who you've used in the past, who you'll use again, or a referral from a trusted friend or advisor. And depending on what statistic, which source of this research you believe, less than 10% are made from marketing and advertising. So as soon as agents wake up to the real reality that it's the branding and the social media and the marketing and the advertising is going to become more ubiquitous, and by that I mean everyone and their brother is going to have a really good social media presence, then you're going to have to actually ask yourself, what's going to make myself different? It's your ability to essentially have meaningful conversations with folks about helping them solve their problem, which is buying or selling real estate, and doing it consistently at a high level. And that's what's going to help you win the game big time. And that's what's going to differentiate you. And there's going to be more demand than that for folks that have that mindset and that skill set than there has been probably ever in our country because of demographics, because of the great housing boom that we're about to experience. Julie, I'm losing my voice. So you want to wrap?
I think that's the pod. We talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we did. I wonder how many people, I wonder if they're going to take to our conversation about, some people will get very triggered about some of the things we talked about because they're going to politicize it. Yeah, it is what it is.
Just, as always, if, I welcome people questioning and we try and fact check ourselves. But if you're going to feel triggered by that, give us why do you feel that way? Not just that you feel that way. We try to give all of you guys, not just, hey, here's what's going on, but here's the facts behind it and the stats and what's happening and the trends and all of that. So if you're going to message us, then you do the same, and that's okay.
And before you do, especially if you're throwing around political propaganda or just generally half-baked thoughts, why don't you go to Grok, or why don't you go to OpenAI, or why don't you just do your own homework and test your beliefs like we've been doing? Because otherwise you're not going to know where you've been propagandized. You're not going to know where you've been lied to. You're not going to know where maybe for a long time you've been manipulated into thinking and feeling something that you are going to now choose not to think and feel anymore because you realize that you are essentially being somebody else's puppet for maybe political reasons, maybe financial reasons. It's very liberating. It's scary and it's wonderful all at the same time. So hopefully this podcast was scary and wonderful all at the same time for you as well.
Find out.
You guys have a fantastic day. Thank you for listening. Remember, regular shows, except on Friday. Have a great day.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.